I'm going to read you a letter that a little boy named Cole wrote home from camp. He was in Boy Scouts. You guys know what that is? So Boy Scouts, basically, they take you out, and you're supposed to have a really nice, camp with as little trouble as possible. So I hope you appreciate the humor. Accept it and read it from the viewpoint of like an American mom, right? So Russian moms let you do anything. American moms are a little bit more worried. So he says, letter from camp. Dear Mom, our scoutmaster told us all to write to our parents in case you saw the flood on TV and were worried. We are okay. Only one of our tents and 2 sleeping bags got washed away. Luckily, none of us got drowned because we were all up in the mountain looking for Chad when it happened. Oh yes, please call Chad's mother and tell her he's okay. He can't write because of the cast. I got to ride in one of the search and rescue jeeps. It was neat. We never would have found him in the dark if it hadn't been for the lightning. Scoutmaster Webb got mad at Chad for going on a hike alone without telling anyone. Chad said he did tell him, but it was during the fire, so he probably didn't hear him. Did you know that if you put gas on a fire, the gas can will blow up? The wet wood still didn't burn, but one of our tents did. Also some of our clothes. John is going to look weird until his hair grows back. We will be home on Saturday if Scoutmaster Webb gets the car fixed. It wasn't his fault about the wreck. The brakes worked okay when we left. Scoutmaster Webb said that a car that old, you have to expect something to break. That's probably why he can't get insurance on it. We think it's a neat car. He doesn't care if we get it dirty and if it's hot. Sometimes he lets us ride on the tailgate. It gets pretty hot with 10 people in a car. He lets us take turns riding in the trailer until the highway patrolman stopped us and talked to us. Scoutmaster Webb is a neat guy. Don't worry, he's a good driver. In fact, he's teaching Terry how to drive. But he only lets him drive on the mountain roads where there isn't any traffic. All we see up there are logging trucks. Did you know you don't need guardrails on mountain roads? Scoutmaster Webb has to spend a lot of time working on the car, so we are trying not to cause him any trouble. Guess what? We have all passed our first aid merit badges. When Dave dove in the lake and cut his arm, we got to see how a tourniquet works. Also, Wade and I threw up. Scoutmaster Webb said it was probably just food poisoning from the leftover chicken. He said that they got sick that way with the food that they ate in prison. I'm so glad he got out and became our scoutmaster. He said he sure figured out how to get things done better while he was doing his time. I have to go now. We're going into town to mail our letters and buy bullets. Don't worry about anything. We are fine. Love, Cole. And that is a letter home from Cole. There is relevance to that. That wasn't just meant to entertain you. If you can imagine Jacob at home and his sons keep coming back from Egypt with worse and worse news, Oh, they've been tricked. Their money's been put back in the bags. Simeon is locked up. Now the ruler, that distant ruler who seems to be just so hatefully inclined towards him, now he wants to take Benjamin from him. And Jacob is just tearing his hair out. Like one thing after another after another. And it's all a story about God working this family. You remember the first message, I hope, and how just discombobulated and so broken up this family was, and just so in sin. And God, the stories about God working this family over and bringing them from darkness into light, right? And so we go into chapter 44. We're going to start there, Genesis chapter 44. That's all there is to cover tonight. And then PC Walker will be here next time to cover 45, and that'll be our concluding message. So I really hope you guys show up then. Bring all your friends as well. But chapter 44, I'm going to cover all the little bit that Leo didn't cover last time because he really took all the good stuff. Then he commanded the steward of his house, fill the men's sacks with food as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. And put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest. with his money for the grain, and he did as Joseph told him. Verse 3, as soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away with their donkeys. So, we're going to pause here for a second. They don't know anything. They wake up in the morning, right? The donkeys are prepared for them. They're well rested. They're still feeling full from the meal they had last night at Joseph's house. Everything looks great. They think, wow, we're finally through this mess. We're done. Everything's good. They pick up the sacks. They're like, wow, we got a great portion. We've made out good. They put it on the donkeys. They head out early in the morning. And then here's what happened. They had only gone a short distance from the city. Now Joseph said to his steward, up, follow after the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is it not from this that my Lord drinks, and by this that he practices divination? You have done evil in doing this. So there they are, traveling out of the city. Everything's swell and dandy, until all of a sudden they see the flashing lights behind them, right? The Egyptian highway patrol is hot in pursuit. They pull them over. They begin to search the sacks, and they say, well, first of all, they say, you've stolen the cup. And of course, they think they're innocent. They said, no, we didn't steal the cup. Come on. We've learned our lesson. So they open up the sacks, and even they say, hey, if you find the cup in any of our sacks, they said this, when he overtook them, he spake these words, and they said to him, why does my Lord speak such words as these? Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. Behold, the money that we found in the mouth of our sacks, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan. We're honest people. We fessed up. How can then we steal the silver or gold from our Lord's house? You know what? Whichever of your servants is found with it shall die, and we also will be my Lord's servants. And he said, let it be as you say. He who is found with it shall be my servant, and the rest of you shall be innocent. You know that Russian saying, тебя никто за язык не тянул, да? Then each man quickly lowered his sack to the ground, and each man opened his sack, and he searched, beginning with the eldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. If you can imagine them in this moment, you know that feeling you guys get when you have a flight at like 8:30 and you wake up and it's like 9, or maybe you have an exam that morning, it's your final, it's like 7 a.m. and you wake up and it's like 6:59, and you go to school in like UC Berkeley, that like almost nauseousness in the pit of your stomach, that cold sweat that breaks out as you frantically try to get ready, or maybe if some of you have been in a car crash, everything slows down as you see the car coming at you. I've been through a couple of them, and it's just, you can't believe it's happening to you, right? They think it's all done. They finally think they're through, and then finally this again. This again. We've just been through 2 chapters of this back and forth with this angry ruler. We're done with him finally. We can go back. We can feed our families, get rid of this police officer, and then finally, Ben took the cup. And that feeling again. They're back in it. I remember the first time I was pulled over, I thought I was pretty smart. I was coming over the hill a little bit too fast. The cop saw me. I saw him kind of turning around behind me. So I thought it was smart. I took a quick right, then took another right, pulled into this apartment building, a parking lot, turned off my car. Like, yes. No. 2 seconds later, the guy pulls into the same parking lot, gets out like, you live here? No, but my friend lives here, and the whole time you were just sweating profusely. And I'm sure he looked at me, he's like, you such a liar. He knew instantly. But here it is, they're in the same situation, and they're being taken back now. The silver cup, I think we had one here. Is it still up here, the silver cup? It was here last time. I don't see it in here anymore. Ben took it? Bring him to me. The silver cup was what it was, and there were different types of cups, but this was usually like a shallow, like you know how they do it in the Middle East, a shallow cup. It usually had some sorts of drawings in there, and what they would do usually in the Middle East, they would pour water into it, and then you could pour wax, and you would look at the wax and see what the wax would resemble, or maybe you would throw stones in it and see the reflections or how the waves, So it was used for divination in the land of Egypt. Joseph didn't use it, but he told them to say that for a reason. He said he didn't want it to seem like Ben just stole a piece of treasure, like taking the gold back. He wanted them to understand, your younger brother stole a piece of state property. That was government property. It's like you stole the Declaration of Independence, It was like, it's a big thing. You stole something from this guy's desk that he would make decisions on, It was a big deal. So these men are brought back, and you see here, they rent their clothes. Let's see here. This is verse 13. Then they tore their clothes, and every man loaded his donkey, and they returned to the city. The fact that they rent their clothes tells us something. Before, they could afford to lose a brother, right? In fact, they were glad to see him go. Over the last 2 chapters, God has been working with this family. He's been working with this family, and finally here, when there's danger to one of them, they feel the danger through all of them, they rent their clothes. There's finally a feeling of identity. There's finally a feeling that we have to stand up for each other. And so they're coming back. And when Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, he was still there. So it's an early morning for him. He's still at his house. They fell before him to the ground. And Joseph said to them, "What deed is this that you have done? Do you not know that a man like me can indeed practice divination?" Meaning, I practice divination. And he's just, it's still his Egyptian mask, so to speak, because we know as a pious a believer, he would not. So he says, I did some magic, and I knew that you guys had took it. And why would you steal something if you know that I would know? And Judah said, "What shall we say to my Lord?" And folks, we're going to concentrate, and we're going to look at this verse very closely. Verse 16. And Judah said, "What shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how can we clear ourselves? For God has found out the guilt of your servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also, in whose hand the cup has been found." It was only 25 years ago that Judah was the one sitting there eating his lunch in a field surrounded by his father's sheep, listening to the cries of his younger brother Joseph coming up from one of the cisterns, and seeing the camels in the distance. He had an idea. He said, "Let's sell that guy. Let's sell him. We're not going to kill him. Just going to get rid of him and make some money on the side." 25 long years. A secret shared by this group of men, told to nobody. Nobody else knew. And now he's the one that steps up. He's the one that steps up in the face of judgment, and he says, "God has found out the guilt of our servants." Folks, when you stand before the judgment of God, 3 things happen. 1, sin is obvious. Sin instantly becomes obvious. In this case, they stood before Joseph with the cup as proof. It wasn't like, we don't know, we didn't take the cup. It was there. They were caught red-handed. The proof was in the pudding, as they say, and they were about to reveal even more sin. So they stole the cup, but yet there was even more sin that they were going to talk about. So the sin is very obvious. If I asked you today, and don't answer me, because this is between you and God, but if I asked you, what sin are you struggling with in your life today? What sin are you struggling with in your life today? There's immediately something that came to mind, isn't there? Some of you guys set your jaw a little bit, tried to hide some emotion perhaps. Immediately something comes to mind. We all know what our weakness is, and we know God knows what our weakness is. When we stand before the judgment of God, the sin is obvious. We don't have to reach for it. We don't have to say, God, I'm a pretty good guy. Like, I'm really going to have to rank my brain for a sin. We know exactly why we're going to be before him and what he's asking of us. We know exactly what we're struggling with. God knows what's going on. Number two that happens when you stand before God in judgment, there is no possible defense. Judah says, how can we clear ourselves? How can we clear ourselves? He has got nothing to say. He's been caught red-handed. There's no defense. I grew up in a very conservative home, as you guys know. My mom listened to Christian music. My parents listened to Christian music, and that's all that was played in our house. The only non-Christian music she ever heard was when she made a trip to Walmart, right? And they would play it over the speakers, and she would come in like, bezbožníky, So she didn't like it, but that's what it is. So we as kids would have all sorts of music, but we would hide it from the parents. And I remember one day, we're cleaning the house. Mom walks in just as Ace of Base plays through the speakers. All that she wants is another baby. There was not a lawyer in the world that could have gotten me out of that trouble. There was nothing I could have said or done, and nobody I could have hired to make her change her mind. Folks, when we are in sin, when we are in trouble before God, when we are before his judgment, there's no defense. There's nothing that you can say or do. It irritates me, the people that think that they can stand before God and say something. They can stand before the creator of the world, the one that said a word and created everything, the one that, like you're flying on a plane and you're looking down and you can see the world, just a little bit of it, and that's nothing for him. And you're going to stand before God and you're going to try to say something about yourself? Like you know yourself better than, he knows you so many times more better. He knows everything that ever happened in your life that made you do anything. And you're going to try to say that you're innocent? You're going to have no defense. In fact, number 3 happens. Immediate self-judgment. Judah says, behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also, in whose hand the cup has been found. Folks, when standing before God, whether now in the privacy of your heart, maybe in the privacy of your bedroom as you go home each night and stand before him and think about the day, or maybe on the final judgment day, you will know the sins. You will have no defense because holiness is holiness. We know that. It's a standard that's never going to change. And we're going to be self-judged. I promise you right now, every person that ends up in hell will know exactly why they are there. Every person that stands before the throne of God and will hear the words that I don't know you, be gone, be cast away, they will know exactly that they are deserving of it, and they will accuse themselves of it. Because folks, heaven and hell are a choice that you make by your actions and your faith. It's not, I was living my life and I accidentally ended up in hell, or I accidentally ended up in heaven. It's a choice, a conscious choice that we each make. And it'll be found out in the judgment before God. That is the truth of the Bible. And so, we read on, but he said, Joseph says, "For it far be it from me that I should do so. Only the man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my servant. But as for you, go up in peace to your father." Then Judah went up to him and said, "O my lord, please let your servant speak a word in my lord's ears, and let not your anger burn against your servant, for you are like Pharaoh himself." And then we read on, and he begins to tell the story about how they went back and what happened. Whatever Joseph decides to do now will be right and righteous and more than righteous. And it'll be benevolent, in fact. Because before him, if you think about the people that stood before him, we discussed this, weeks and weeks ago, but think about this. Reuben was a man who committed incest. He slept with one of his father's wife. He deserved any punishment that Joseph deemed to hand out to him in the eyes of God, right? Judah was a fornicator. He slept around with prostitutes. We read that. That's in the scripture. Levi, Simeon, and the rest of the gang. You guys remember when they took up their weapons in anger and just killed a whole city full of men? That's all recorded in here too. That's black on white. Everybody knew about it. All of them were guilty of selling Joseph into slavery. So whatever Joseph decided to do, however he decided to punish these people, it would have been right and righteous. Chuck Colson, he's better known for his participation in the Watergate scandal. If you guys, maybe you don't know, but if you guys know who Richard Nixon is, and how he was, I think he was impeached because of the Watergate scandal where they were spying on the other party. But he, formerly, before that, he served in the Marines. Chuck Colson went to prison for his part in the Watergate scandal. He came out and became a Christian, and then he wrote about his life, and he said, the Watergate scandal happened. I was accused for, all these things, but he says, here's the sin that really bothered me all my life. It was the sin that I really didn't tell anybody, the secret sin. He said, I was off the coast of Puerto Rico in one of the jungles there fighting against guerrillas for the U.S. Army. Led a platoon of about 40 men. And we were strictly prohibited from buying, selling, interacting with the locals. They told us, stay away from these people. You have the enemy, go fight them. Don't do anything else. And he says, one hot day, we're trudging through the swamp, and we see this guy with his little donkey traveling, and on the donkey's back were 2 big bags full of ice and cold drinks. And all the men immediately, they forgot the order, they grabbed their money, they went up to this guy and tried to start to buy some drinks, and then he had an idea. He's like, I'm gonna show off in front of these guys. I'm gonna be like the best, platoon leader ever. So he's like, men, stop. I want you to seize this man. So they're all bewildered, they arrest the guy. They're like, all right, now I want you to confiscate the contraband and enjoy yourself. So they're like, all right. So they drink all the drinks, and they're like, all right, now release the prisoner. And he says, it seemed so cool and, fun at that time. The guy ran away. We didn't kill him or anything. We all had some drinks. And then years later, as he began to realize the consequences of his actions and the fact that the poor guy probably had invested every penny he had in those drinks, hoping to sell him, that he had robbed this guy out of months and months of his wages. And he said, it's followed me all my life. That guy somewhere off the coast of Puerto Rico that I had done this to. I had taken everything away from him. It was this secret sin. And so we see Joseph and these men before him with each with their own secret sin. And Joseph says, hey, I'll only keep Benjamin. I'm not going to punish all of you guys. Just give me Benjamin and you guys go home. And then Judah steps up and he says, no, that's not going to work. Let me tell you something. Now, here is the perfect example where they could have said, well, it's a pretty good deal, Like if you're in court and all of your buddies are accused and they're like, all right, we're only going to take the guy that did the crime. All the rest of you guys are free to go. You take that. You take that and go. Because all right, Benjamin stole the cup, right? So he's guilty. More or less, right? They could have said, well, Benjamin was kind of in the same position as Joseph was years ago. I don't know that they all liked him. Maybe it was like good riddance with Benjamin. We'll come back and we'll tell Dad, Benjamin turned out to be a rotten apple. I don't know what it was with that wife, but she did not produce great kids. They were all thieves. They were all bad. Let's leave him. Let's cut our losses. We've got to get back to Canaan. We've got hungry families to feed. What are we going to do? Let them starve? Let's get back. We'll leave Benjamin here. He'll be fine. He's only going to be a servant. What's the worst that can happen, right? God's been working with him. Judah steps up to the plate. And again, he says, God is judging us. He says, not for the cup that we stole, but for the real sin. And so he begins to explain to Joseph, thinking that he was an outsider. And he says, Joseph, let me tell you a story. This is why we're in this position. If you remember, it kind of reminds me of, not Noah. It slips my mind. The guy that got swallowed by the whale. Jonah. Thank you. Jonah, when he's on the boat, I should read my Bible more. When he's on the boat, and they say, hey, what's going on? What's the storm all about? And he says, I have to confess, it's because I'm running away from God, right? And so here's what's happening here. He says, you know what? Whatever's happening, all of the storm that's around us, there's a reason. There's a reason. And he begins to tell him the story. Then Judah went up to him and says, oh Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's ears. And my Lord asked his servant, saying, have you a father or a brother? And we said to my Lord, we have a father, an old man, and a young brother, the child of his old age. His brother is dead. He alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. His brother is dead. That's all they say about Joseph. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me that I may set my eyes. So he talks about all of this. And we went down to my servant, go again. Look at verse 27. Then your servant, my father, said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One left me, and I said, surely he has been torn to pieces, and I have never seen him since. If you take this one also from me, and harm happens to him, you will bring down my gray hairs in evil to Sheol. Here's another point, folks. Sin will always be discovered. No matter what it is, at some point in time, sin will always be discovered. It's been over 20 years. It's been over 20 years since the brothers had shown up at their father's doorstep. After coming back from feeding the sheep, his father worried about Joseph and asked them, have you seen him? And they said, maybe quietly, yes, we have. And they gave him the torn, bloodied robes. 20 years, 25 actually, they've hidden the secret. Nobody knew about it. And so finally, crushed and broken by this plan that God has put together for them, they decide to open up. It comes out, and the first person they say it to, this evil ruler, happens to be Joseph. How ironic is that, huh? The first person they talk about this crime is the same guy that they committed it to. And they say, this happened. And we came back and we told our father that he was ripped apart. And Joseph, for the first time, hears what happened that day. He hears that story that as he was traveling to Egypt, his father was told that he was torn apart. He hears their alibi, what they had said to cover up their tracks. And so he's listening to the story. I don't know how he's not getting mad. I think I would be furious at this point. But he's listening to the story and this alibi. But here's the point about sin. You can't hide it. And here's the reason why. People will notice. Sin makes us hide. And folks, I will tell you this right now. Sometimes it's very, very obvious. When people leave the church or leave their community groups or leave their groups of friends, hey, I need some time alone, man. Like, I'm busy tonight, and you really don't see them anywhere, right? It's very obvious. You guys know that. Adam and Eve, what's the first thing they did? They hid. It's like, guys, you got this awesome opportunity to talk to God. Like, I want some of that. They're like, nah, we're going to hide in the bushes for a while. That's what sin does to us. It changes us. It makes us slow. It makes us lazy in Christianity. It makes us take a step back, just kind of distance ourselves from all that is holy as it takes a hold of us more and more. It makes us hurt other people. If you remember David and Uriah, when David slept with Uriah's wife, and then to cover up his tracks, what did he do? He killed the guy. And that's what sin does. And that's how it'll all be found out. And God brings them to a breaking point. He had them go back and forth to Egypt until finally they couldn't take it anymore. And here it is, the sin is revealed. They admit it. It's an admission before God, and it's an admission before man. And the second point here is God will work through time. God will work through time. 25 years, you would have think God would have swept it under the carpet, right? He would have said, all right, these guys are hopeless. 25 years, they're still keeping it a secret. You let them take it to their grave and see what happens in their afterlife. And yet, God, it's never too late. And he keeps working and working and working away at these people. I remember a story of my buddy who was having a great time at his house and fell through his glass door backwards. You know, it's just an average party at his house. So he fell through his glass door backwards. Got all the glass out. Everything was fine. So he's telling me the story. He says 2 years later, he's at a football game. It's like the third quarter. If you guys know what that means, third quarter. And he's like, man, there's this pain in my back. So he's like trying to muscle through it. You know, it gets worse into the fourth. Finally, the football game, he's done. He gets up relieved, rushes to the bathroom to try to figure out what's going on. He reaches back there and feels something sharp right by his spine. And as he begins to dig at it, he takes out like an inch-long shard of glass that's been stuck there the whole time. Folks, that's what happens when God removes the sin out of us. Sometimes it's going to take a little bit. It's going to take years and years. Some of you guys are going to be right up front with God, and the mark of a mature Christian is that amount of time it takes for them to go from sin to repentance. If it's like this, you're there. If it takes you days, weeks, months, years, 25 years, God's still working with you. He's not going to give you up. Because out of these men, he's going to make a great nation. Out of these men, he will rise up something more. And finally, humility. He brings them to humility. And humility means giving up control of your life. Verse 30, now therefore, as soon as I came to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, then as his life is bound up in the boy's life, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die, and your servants will bring down the gray hairs of your servant, our father, with sorrow to Sheol. For your servant became a pledge of safety for the boy to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame for my father, before my father all my life. Verse 33, now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord, and let the boy go back to his father. Now let me remain instead of my brother. Take my life now instead of my brother. None of you guys have kids, or most of you guys don't have kids. Maybe there's somebody older in the back of the room, but think about your siblings. Think about your siblings. If they were, you found out, abducted by like a Mexican drug cartel, right? Taken to a third world country. It's a thing. It happens all the time. Taken to a third world country and you got notice that they required a ransom. And they needed one of you guys, you as a family member, to deliver it so you could identify the guy and bring the suitcase full of money. Now, history showed that they would likely just keep both of you guys. Maybe shoot you and just keep the money. It's easier that way. Would you go? Would you do it? Do you have any brothers? Yeah. You would go down? I don't know, man. That's a tough decision. That's a tough decision. I don't know if I would do it. I think I would want to right now, but when you're in that moment, that's a tough decision. But God had brought him to that point in time where he was just completely humbled. You know what the word humility means? Humility in ancient Hebrew and also in the Egyptian language meant the rising and falling of the river, which seems really strange until you realize and think about the Egyptian culture. When the Nile rose, it overflooded its banks. It brought a lot of nutrients and water to the fields around the river. And there were crops. And everybody had plenty to eat. And everybody had a great time. I mean, it was prosperous. But when the Nile didn't overflow and it just flowed right along into the Mediterranean, there were no crops and everybody starved. And so everybody was dependent upon the river. If it overflowed, they were good. If it didn't, it was bad, right? It was this dependency upon something. And so that's what humility is. When you are humble, if you think you're truly humble, you must be 100% dependent on God. There's nothing else you're dependent on but Him. And at that point, whatever needs to be done, your life is not your own. It depends on something else. And so when something like this happens and it's said, oh, you've got to exchange your life. You say, that's fine. It's already not my own. I've already given it up. Take me instead. And that's a lesson to each of us today. If you think you're humble before God, if you think you're really in sync with Him, if you really think your life, and we like to say, hey, I gave my life to Jesus. Really? I find that hard to believe. I really find that hard to believe. I like Paul Washer. He opened up a Twitter account, and then he saw the pictures of the people that followed him, and he said, I think I need to preach more of the gospel to these people. Just based on their looks alone, he says, I know these people need the gospel. What today in your life can you point at and say, hey, Pete, because of this, I know that I am humble before the Lord and my life belongs to Him. Can you do that? Or let me reverse that question. Can somebody come into your life and say, I can show you why you're not? And maybe many things why you're not. Are you truly humble? Do you truly possess the quality of humility before God? Because if you don't, God will put you in that position. I'm going to just share a couple of stories from my life, and we're going to close here shortly. Because this is a lesson that God's been teaching me. A couple of weeks ago, I'll start with this week. Last Sunday, I didn't have the privilege of being with you guys. I was flying out for some business for work. I left on Saturday night. I drove to San Francisco. I was supposed to fly out of SFO. I got a hotel, get some sleep in. Next morning, I get up. I'm at the airport. My flight's at 5:55. I'm there at 4:50. I walk up to the counter, give her my card, and she's like, all right, can I have your passport, sir? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, you realize you're flying out of country. Can I have your passport? And like that cold feeling, that feeling like when you're late for your exam feeling, that's the feeling I get all of a sudden when I realize I've got meetings the next day. If I miss them, I'm in huge trouble because our president's going to be there, our vice president. I mean, everybody and their mom's going to be there. It's like if their mom was a VP, So it was going to be like a black eye for me. I would have been looked down upon. And I realized I can't fly out of country because I left my passport at home. You guys want to hear some fervent prayers? You guys should have heard some of my prayers that morning. Barely awake and like, God, please make something happen. And the Lord was merciful. I called in. They're like, hey, we've got a flight 3 hours later from Sacramento. Can you make it? I said, I can. I know what the speed limit is, and I know I can get there on time. And I got the passport and I made it. But for that whole car ride, I tell you what, man, those were some prayers of thanksgiving and humility there. God just takes and stops you for a second. 1 second you're going 1,000 miles an hour and you think you're flying out, and the next second you're thinking about, oh my goodness, I'm going to get fired, right? A couple of weeks before that, driving out of a church parking lot, I was going to grab some breakfast downtown, and early in the morning, coming out of this like turn right here, taking a left, and I hit something, and I feel like my wheel go like, do-do-do-do-do, and I'm like, doesn't seem to be a flat. I stop the car, I look at it, nothing's happening. I drive into the downtown area, something breaks off, it stops doing the do-do sound, you know. That's how it sounded, I don't know. So I'm like, all's good. I come up to the first stoplight, and my little like tire low pressure light goes on. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I have no time for this. It's like 8:30, churches, I want to get some food. I pull over to the side of the road, my tire's busted. So I begin to change my tire. This guy rolls up on a bicycle. And I thought he was a homeless guy. And he's like, yeah, let me help you change I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I'll help you so I can give you some money. Like, you've earned some money, and that'll be a great way for me to bless you, and you bless me. So I'm like, yeah, sure, help me out. So he helps me change the tire. He like practically does the whole thing himself. I'm like, all right, brother, wait here a second. I'm going to go grab my wallet. I go for my wallet, and I realize I don't have my wallet. I left my wallet at home. I'm like, oh, dude, I'm so sorry. Like, can we like connect somehow? He's like, hey, I own that restaurant right there. I'm like, oh, you're not homeless. So he's like, yeah. So just come to my restaurant later on. But to me, it was like, all right, I appreciate it. But it was like that second stopping point. You know what I mean? Like, God gave me the flat tire, and now my wallet's gone. So now I can't go to this place. I have to go back home and grab some money. So I turn around, I'm driving on a spare, I make a left turn to try to cross the bridge, and there's a cop like, hey, you gotta stop here. I'm like, what's going on? Well, you'll see in a second. And there was a parade going down the street, breast cancer awareness. I'm like, all right, it'll take a minute. It took like half an hour, just sitting there, and everybody's walking by in pink, and it's a one-way street, so you can't do a U-turn. And the whole time I'm like, oh my goodness, God, why? Why don't you love me, Jesus? And all God's saying to me is like, you gotta slow down. You gotta slow down. Finally, the parade passed on. I got through, figured out a way out to go home. And the whole time God was saying, hey, be dependent on me. You're so dependent on having your wallet. Aren't you guys? Like, I could lose everything, but if I've got my phone and wallet, I could call my way out of a situation or buy my way out of a situation, like one or the other, right? And he's like, just chill and know that I am God and I'm in control. There's a great, great story about a man that was walking through the streets of the city in old times, and he's walking around and he's saying, I'm not afraid of the king. I'm not afraid of the king at all. And just walking around and screaming all this, and the people are like, what are you doing? Like, be quiet. He's like, no, I'm not afraid of the king. And so some cop picks him up and drags him to court, and he's like, King, this guy is walking around and he's saying that he's not afraid of you. He's like, that's right. And the king's like, all right, sir, tell me why you're not afraid of me. Bring it. He's like, sir, I am not afraid of you because I know all of your laws are just and fair, and I follow each one of them, so I'm not afraid of you. And the king says, that's true. There is no reason to be afraid if you follow the law, right? There's no reason to be afraid when there's no sin inside of us that burdens us, that slows us down. When we've gotten rid of that anchor that tries to, latch on. When we've got rid of Satan's hooks that he tries to get into us, to bring us back with his sin. When we've gotten rid of all that, we can say, I'm not afraid of the king. The judgment of God, bring it. I welcome it. I welcome it. For it'll make me better here on earth, and it'll give me glory there in heaven. Amen. Folks, let's just stand and pray together, and we'll worship afterwards. So please don't leave. Let's just bow our hearts in prayer. Father, I thank you again for this evening and this ability to fellowship with your people, with each person here, God. I know this message was very relevant to me. I hope it is for all of us, God, that you just want us all to stop and to listen to your voice for a little bit. You want us to examine ourselves and seek out all sin that keeps us from being holy like you, and just bring it to you, God. And face judgment now rather than later, because heaven and hell are a choice. It's our decision. And we want to choose glory, God. We want to choose you. Be with us now, God, with your Spirit as we worship again. Move our hearts to come closer to you. And we just want to praise your name all together. And the people of God said, amen.